Brenton, good to see you. Now, what are some of the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to super?
Probably the biggest mistake that I see are people who actually ignore their superannuation. So in discussions I've had with a lot of people over the years, I ask them, so where's your superannuation at the moment? And I just get a blank look on their face. It's a case of, I think it's in Australian Super or it's in AMP or something like that. I said, how much do you have? I don't know. Where's it invested? I really don't know. And I think the biggest problem is that a lot of people don't understand what super actually does, the benefits that it'll actually give you. And as a result of that, they don't seem to really care too much. But at the end of the day, you've earned it, it's been given to you, it's your money. And over time, it goes from 50 grand to 100 grand to $500,000 and sometimes much, much more. And you've got this big chunk of money just sitting there. Yeah. And so many people just don't even know where it is. Yeah. If I was to ask you where your car is, you'd know exactly where you've parked it. Yeah. And that might be a $20,000 or a $50,000 car. But you could have a couple $100,000 just sitting there. And if I ask you where is it and you don't know, it's a disturbing situation, really. But most people actually don't know what they're doing with it. And that's probably the biggest mistake that I come across.
And if every month you took physically 10% of your salary and put it somewhere, you'd take a big interest.
Oh, you would?
Yeah, wouldn't you?
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what's happening.
It is. I describe to a lot of people, I said, if you had 200 grand just sitting in a bank account and someone said you have to invest it, most people I would expect would spend years and years just poring over books, going to seminars, researching on Google, speaking to different people, but they don't.
Yeah.
It just sits there.
Compulsory super has meant we've taken it for granted.
Very much so.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, all right, the big question. How much do you need to invest in superannuation to be in a comfortable retirement as a percentage of your income?
A lot of that depends on what you actually do with the money. So at the moment, 9.5%, which is what you have to put in there, if you just put that into a modest kind of a superannuation investment and you let it sit there and you don't do a great deal with it, you're going to fall well short of what you need to have as a retirement income. So someone earning $60,000 at the moment, as an example, putting away their 9.5, is going to be lucky to get half of their current income as retirement income once you take inflation into consideration. Wow. And it's the inflation which is the really big factor that a lot of people don't take into consideration. Yeah. So 60,000, 9.5, you're going to be looking at, depending on returns, 700, 800, maybe 900,000. Now 900,000 is a fair bit of money, especially if you're on 60,000. You invest that conservatively, you'll probably replace a bit of your income. But you have to keep in consideration in 30 or 40 years' time, everything's going to be 2 to 3 times more expensive than what it is today. So 900 grand is the same as retiring with maybe $400,000.
People say to me, I won't need that much in retirement because I'll cut back on this and this and this. And I think, are you crazy? Wouldn't you want to maintain your pre-retirement lifestyle after you retire? Retirement's meant to be a lot of fun. It's not meant to be frugal and scrimping and scraping. So if you wanted to retire on your pre-retirement income, what would you need to put into super?
An amount of about 15% will get you a lot closer.
So an extra 5.5% each year.
Yeah, it's actually half extra of what you're putting in already.
Puts it into perspective, doesn't it? How do you choose the right super fund?
Well, there's no real one fund that's going to suit everybody. So a lot of it comes down to your personal needs and what your intentions actually are. So some people want to have a lot of control over their fund. They want to be able to pick and choose the investments they're going to be making. They might want to pick the shares or make sure they're getting the right interest rates on any term deposits. So they're going to need something which is a lot more complex, something which has a lot more options, but that's going to be more expensive for them. And options down there are things like wraps, self-managed super funds. There's a lot that will cater for that space. But if you're the kind of person who just wants to put their 9.5 or 12 or 15% into their superannuation fund and just let it sit there and forget about it and know that it's being looked after by a good, trustworthy manager, then you're going to want something a lot more simple because you don't want to pay for all these features and benefits. The other thing also, the amount of money that you have in your superannuation. So quite often I tell people who've got smaller balances, it's what you put into it which is so much more powerful than the potential returns you're going to be making. So if you've got $20,000 in your superannuation fund and you put in $5,000, that is going to eclipse an extra 2 or 3% of potential return. So the focus really should be on keeping it cost effective and focusing on how much you can actually put in there. So different people are going to need different funds.
Right, okay. So you really do need some advice on that, don't you?
You need some advice. At the very, very least, you need to get yourself up to speed.
What are some of the fees we should be wary of?
So there are so many fees inside superannuation, and some of them you get told about, and some of them you don't. So there's the member fees, there's the management fees. In self-managed superannuation fund, there's the accounting fees, there's the audit fees. On top of that, you've got things such as insurance, you've got trade fees. So if you're buying and selling investments inside your superannuation fund, you can have something called a buy-sell differential as well. So if you want to move your money from cash to Australian shares, if you've ever been to, you looked at the board of a foreign exchange business, and they're buying dollars at one price and they're selling at another, the difference between the two is quite big. Now, in some investments, if you want to move your money from cash to shares, there could be a buy-sell differential of 1, 2, 3, even 4%. Wow. So as soon as you move your money from one spot to another, they might advertise no switching fees, but they'll charge you 4% as a buy-sell differential. There's so many little traps that you can actually fall into by just looking at the headline marketing numbers.
Yeah. And I suppose you start with looking at your annual return, your annual statement from your super fund. So many people just don't even look at that bit of paper that comes in. But that tells you so much, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly does. It certainly does. I've had lots of people I've spoken to in the past, but so look, I made a return, then I saw the fees, and the fees were equal to the returns.
Yeah. Yeah. And also the options. I get a lot of people saying, oh, my fund hasn't performed, and you say, well, what options are you in? What do you mean, what options? I say, turn your statement over, and it gives you a list of them all. So it's really taking an interest in your super is the first step, isn't it?
Just being informed is the most important thing, simply because it's a lot of money sitting there, and every single fund, bar just a couple of more basic ones or things like defined benefits, they're going to allow you to pick and choose where the money goes.
Yep. How do you maximise your superannuation?
Well, there's two ways, really. There's having it perform more effectively, which is a mixture of chasing solid returns and keeping your fees low. And the other one is putting in as much as you can.
Right. Okay. So how much can you put in?
So depending on your age, you can put in 30 or 35,000. You can also put in lump sums as well. Most people generally only put in the lump sums when they're in the latter parts of their career, when they're trying to get as much in there as possible. They might have sold some assets as well. But for most people, it's really about just that little bit of extra salary sacrifice, just that little bit going in bit by bit. It's something which we refer to as one of the core levers in your financial situation. It's the kind of thing when you're on top of your budget and you know you've got a little extra, you can just pull that lever a little bit and a little bit more goes in there. You're not going to notice it too much. And from a taxation perspective, it's incredibly powerful. Because you might be putting away only a couple $100 per month, but normally you'd pay tax on that money and you might only get a fraction of what it is you're actually earning. Instead, if that's going to superannuation, you get to keep 85% of it.
Yeah, because basically you are salary sacrifice means you contribute to superannuation pre-tax.
That's right.
Is that? So that's the real zing. That supercharges your contribution.
Oh, by a phenomenal amount. If you're in the highest marginal tax rate, if you put away $100 as an example, you get to take home half of that.
Yep.
Instead, by salary sacrificing, you're putting in 85% of what you actually earn. Yep. So that's an extra 35%, which in very simplistic terms, if you gave me $50 and I gave you $85 in return straight away, that's the best return you're ever going to see. Yep. And there's no risk to that.
Yeah, even if the super fund doesn't make any money
Correct.
that particular year, you're well ahead. What sort of investment strategy should you choose?
Well, the investment strategy, again, comes down to the individual. Some people are just inherently very nervous people and they don't feel comfortable. And you've got to, when you're investing, while you may push the limits a little bit, you never want to be investing to something which makes you fundamentally very uncomfortable. So that's one of the factors. The other one is your age. So when you're younger, it's easier to go bungee jumping, skydiving, drive your car fast on the racetrack, do all those kind of risky things because you break a bone, it's going to heal. Yep. When you're older, you fall over, you break your hip, that's a bit more of a problem. Investing is very, very similar to that. So typically when you're younger, that's the time when you can take more risks, simply because it's easier for you to recover from it. When you're getting closer to retirement, you don't want that volatility. You don't want all those risks hanging over your life, because you don't want a situation where you're thinking that you're going to retire next year and all of a sudden you've got 10, 15, 20% less money, which is what a lot of people experience through the GFC.
Yep.
So with regards to where you invest, it comes down to how much risk you're willing to take, but typically more aggressive when you're younger. And as you get a little bit closer to retirement, just taper that down, have a little bit more cash, focus a little bit more on the income stream.
Self-managed superannuation funds are the go at the moment. Everyone thinks they're really sexy. What are they, and who are they suited to?
It is a very hot topic, and they are promoted in a way that does make them look like the hottest thing, the best thing since sliced bread. They're actually quite simple on one level, but they're quite complex on another. But the simple version is, at the moment, most people have their superannuation with either an industry or a retail fund, and that's where they employ a group of people to do everything for them. With a self-managed super fund, what you're effectively doing is replacing some of those people who you've outsourced to with yourself. So typically, someone like AMP, as an example, they would sit as the trustee of your fund. They'd also manage the money, and you leave it all to them. By setting up a self-managed superannuation fund, you're saying, I'm going to do that job myself. So you act as the trustee, you are also the investment manager, you make all the decisions. Now, on the one hand, that sounds fantastic. Finally, you're in a situation where you develop a relationship with your superannuation money. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can do whatever you want with it. But with it comes an enormous amount of responsibility. There's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of compliance, you do the wrong thing, and you can be up for some fines and some penalties. But ultimately, the biggest challenge is what you do with the money. And all of a sudden, just as same situation when you walk into a supermarket and there's 50 different types of breakfast cereal, as soon as you take on a self-managed superannuation fund, you can invest into any share, any bank account, buy any property, buy just about any worthwhile investment asset. And it can be overwhelming for a lot of people. And quite often I meet people who've set up a self-managed super fund because it was promoted to them and that seemed like a really good idea at the time, and they've been sitting on cash for the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years because they can't make a decision on what to actually do with their money.
Yeah. And also, you fall into the trap of thinking, I can invest anywhere. Hey, there's that holiday shack that I've always wanted. I'll stick it in my super fund. But there are really strict guidelines, aren't there, on what you can invest in. And, you know, you can't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, there are a lot of guidelines around that. The very simple way of looking at it is, are you going to get a personal benefit from it? So a holiday house that you're going to live in, a car that you're going to drive, some artwork you're going to hang on the wall, anything that you're going to be able to personally benefit from typically is off limits.
Yeah, yeah. People who take a break in the workforce and therefore their superannuation is dormant and then they come back again, how can they supercharge their super and get back on track?
Well, there's a lot of different scenarios where that might actually happen, and it really comes down to, there's two real scenarios, one where it's planned and one where it's not planned. So in a planned situation, if you know that in a few years' time you're going to be taking a bit of a break, one of the best things you can do is, if you've got the funds available to, is to top up your superannuation a little bit. Because what you're going to get there is you're going to get some money in there earlier, and while you're on your break and not working, contributing to your superannuation, it's in there working for you. Yep. So that little bit of extra money is going to give you a little extra return, and when you come back, your balance will be a little bit higher than what it would have been under other situations. The other situation is where it's an unplanned break. So it could be a change in circumstances, it could be moving towards being self-employed as an example, taking time off work to start a family, those kind of things. And when you go back to work, you find yourself quite behind the ball. You could be tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands behind where you could have been, depending on how much time you've actually taken off. And that really just comes down to trying to work out a plan for you. So not everyone has the ability to make maximum contributions to your superannuation, simply because if you've taken time off to start a family, quite often when you go back to work, you've got a bigger mortgage, you've got kids, you might not be working full time. So it's not always a possibility for everyone to actually get back to where they could have been. But really that's just a sacrifice that you make with regards to the decision of where you want to take your life.
Yeah, exactly. I often say to couples when you find out you're pregnant, revert to living on a single income as if you've had the baby right then, and that second income for the 9 months, whack it into super.
Look,
and that gives you a bit of a buffer.
Yeah, it's a brilliant idea. We actually refer that to as the baby savings plan. Oh. Because what happens is a lot of people, when they are going to go down to one income, because starting a family is such a massive deal, there's so many changes coming up, there's so many decisions to actually make, a lot of people fall into the trap of actually not thinking about the finances until they're down to one income already.
Yep.
And it's a very, very fast adjustment when you're adjusting to everything else. And it's very, very common for couples to find themselves with credit card debt, drawing down the mortgage and getting themselves into a little bit of trouble. So if you start 8 or 9 months out at the very, very beginning, by the time you're down to one income, you're used to it.
Yep.
You don't
Yep.
run up the debt. And as you said, you've actually got this little pool of savings which will help you to get through if you need it.
Good to see you, Brendan. Thank
Good
you
to
very
see you
much.
too. Not a problem.